Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Storytime episode. This is going to be the last one until we start letting people sit in on our games. And if you're interested in doing that before the series actually becomes a series, then head over to patreon.com/OSWguild. The link is in the description as well. And anyone who supports us there will get a private invite to pretty much join us on our next few sessions as we wrap up episode 1 is what we're calling it, and then starting the series. So you will be able to be there on the ground floor giving us feedback, and also have some exclusive QA time after each game, so you can kind of like ask questions or be like, hey, I noticed you guys used the thermal detonator to blow up the AT-AT, but you could have used the missile. Why did you not? And they'll be like, because we didn't know we had a missile. You know, that kind of Q&A stuff. It'll be awesome. And I'm looking forward to it. Plus, we left off in the last Storytime episode on some crazy bombshells, and it's just going to keep coming in the story. We're like I said, we're at the end of episode 1. We're wrapping that story up so we can start the series on episode 2 is what we're calling it. I haven't come up with a formal name yet. I'm sure I'll find something. So there's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening, and it will be fun to be there as it happens, especially if you've been keeping up with the story thus far. That said, if you are a patron on Patreon, then keep an eye out this week for your invites. If you're watching this in the future and this video is like months or years old, then don't worry about that. Just move on with your life. So let's just jump into the story where we left off, which was that the group were trying to bring in Dalton Oswin, and the bombshell of the news came out that the guy who they've been conversing and considering Dalton Oswin is not, and is actually a woman named Nissa Voxnar, who has been impersonating this man for the past 3 years, trying to take down the Shadow Collective from the inside because she wanted to seek revenge for her father's death that the real Dalton Oswin caused. And he has basically been imprisoned in his own office under the supervision of a protocol droid and Nissa herself for the past few years. So there was a lot of questions to be had at the end of that session as they brought Dalton down to Vex, who again they're turning this bounty in, and nobody knows that Nissa has been impersonating him this entire time. So they managed to get away with bringing this man in as their bounty, getting paid for it. He's pretty shut-mouthed. He's trying to figure out what's going on in this entire process. So he's not like, he's not like spouting insults. He's watching very, very carefully, because he doesn't know why he's being brought in. He doesn't know what his impersonator did to have a bounty on their head. But he seems quietly confident in his like scary abilities that he tends to turn towards, because he has to be the leader of the Shadow Collective, so he probably is a pretty powerful person. That said, the players also gained a powerful ally or a tenuous ally in the form of Nissa Voxnar, because she is still roaming about. She's no longer impersonating Dalton, because that would be dumb, because he just got brought in as a bounty. Instead, she is using her crazy modified cloaking device that allows her to look like anyone she wants to, and she's also able to just cloak. So she's kind of sneaking around Ord Mantell, presumably. So the players take in Dalton. They get their money. It was, I think, 75,000 credits, which is a pretty significant amount. That's about 3 times more than any of the other ones they got. And they're talking to Vex, and Vex is like, wow, congratulations. I wasn't expecting this so soon. You guys managed to get through the semifinals of the Great Hunt, and now you're moving on to the finals, which means that there is a ceremony that you have to go through tomorrow. It's something that the Mandalorians have kind of taken on as the Great Hunt has become more and more prevalent in their culture. They've started doing these ceremonies to kind of usher in the finals. And the players are kind of like, okay, well, when is that? And Vex basically says like it's probably going to be tomorrow if I can set it up in time, because this is kind of unexpected. So you guys kind of have a little bit of time to relax. So that's what they do. They start heading back out into the street when they overhear someone. It was a guard talking to another guard, being like, "Did you hear about that Wookiee getting out and just like attacking that person?" And the other guard looks and is like, "Yeah, man, I'm actually on my way there right now." The other guard is like, "Wow, that's crazy. Hey, man, be careful, be careful. That seems like a dangerous situation." The other guy's like, "I know, right?" And then they start kind of talking about like their poker game or their sabacc game that they have later tonight, and it's like, "Okay, I'll see you later." And the players overhear this as they're walking out, and instantly Cookie is opening up his data pad, and he's like, "What is going on?" So he opens up the data pad, he looks at the video feed, and his father is not on the bed. In fact, after examining the video feed for a second, he sees that the medical bed that they left him on with this guy who is definitely a person who sells body parts to anyone who needs them, really, and probably makes a pretty penny. But he's a chop shop like medicine man on Ord Mantell that I seriously can't believe that they happen to leave an important character's father with this guy just because, like, whatever. It's awesome story wise though, because what ends up happening is they're looking at this video feed. They see a mess, like things have been knocked over. There's nobody in the bed. And then upon closer inspection, they see a pair of feet on the ground, but the rest of the body is out of frame of the shot. So they start running down into the slums of Ord Mantell where they kind of left him. And they get to the clinic, and outside the clinic is one of the guards, and the guard is kind of consoling a older gentleman who looks like he's holding his elbow, and he's sitting on the ground, and it looks unpleasant. And they walk into the building. The guard is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, like, what are you guys trying to do?" And one of them is in the middle of trying to talk the guard down, while the rest go inside and look, and they see quite the scene. They see stuff knocked over all over the place, and they see that basilisk man, the doctor they left Cookie's father with, dead on the ground, strangled. And they watched the tape back, and they managed to see the entire process. What happened is the guy was going over to change an IV. It looked like a normal process, and then all of a sudden the hand of Cookie's father just reaches up around the neck of the guy, and then before you can really tell what's happening, Cookie's father is on top of him. And you see just the feet out of the frame, right? Because Cookie's father is on top of this guy who his entire body's out of the frame except the feet. And you see the feet kicking around, and then they slowly stop after about a minute. And then you see just kind of the top of Cookie's father's head as he walks out of the office. So they're seeing now the aftermath of this man who is dead, and they walk outside, and the guard is basically consoling this man who got knocked over by some crazy Wookiee and had like red eyes, is what he said. The cookie had like, or the Wookiee rather, not the cookie, the Wookiee had really red eyes and looked feral almost. And the players are like, "Oh great, well we didn't cure Cookie's father, or at least, we tried, but something is still going wrong with him. We need to find him, and we need to save him before he hurts anybody." So they start heading back up into the business district, because the city kind of wraps around. And as they're heading back up over there, they get to the gate that separates the slums from the business district, and they are talking to the guards, and they're like, "Have you seen a Wookiee running through here?" And they're like, "You mean that crazy guy? No, he didn't run through here. He ran up and over the wall about 40 feet down that way and jumped from the wall onto a building." And the players look up, and the wall is like 60 feet high. And they're like, "How the hell did he do that? That's crazy." And then they work their way into the business district to kind of go to the area of where he would have jumped off. And he jumped off onto a rooftop and then just disappeared. And they kind of look around the building, and they find again another guard consoling a person. In fact, it's two guards this time, and the person is laying down on the ground. And they gather, just based on like a short listen in on the conversation, that this man broke the fall of Cookie's father, who jumped down on top of him. He also confirms that Cookie's father seems feral in a way. So the players are they're at least Cookie is. He's kind of desperate. Gand is trying to help as best as he can. Meanwhile, Alask is trying to be more clandestine about it, and Venator is like going super far ahead. He wants to go straight to the spaceport district, which is pretty much at the start of the city, because the city again wraps around Hightown, that is, which wraps around upwards. So they wanted to, get as far ahead of him as they can, and the players run from the business district into the industry district, which again kind of wraps around and connects. And they see right before that a ton of guards who are kind of conversing, and one of them is saying, yeah, we tried chasing him down and he was faster than us, so now we called ahead and we set up checkpoints. And the players at this point are like, we gotta find this, we gotta find him before anything wrong happens or before someone gets their hands on him, because that could be even worse for us than someone getting hurt. And they work their way through the industry district, where they see two kids talking to a guard, and the kids are pointing down the alleyway, and the players don't even bother. They're just like, just follow the line of guards. So they go down the alleyway where the kids were pointing, and the alleyway kind of like goes and narrows and gets darker, and then turns against a wall, and then goes forward a bit, and then kind of has a few turns before they follow it down and see like an open cellar. And Cookie goes and looks down into the cellar, where it's got two like open doors and the stairs leading down into whatever building is here. And the lights are off, and he slowly descends with Gand right behind him. And as he descends in, the light gets darker and darker, but up ahead, down a hallway, he does see an open room, and there is a light. The light is flickering a bit. So Cookie runs forward, busts into the room, looks in the corner of the room where Astimus, his father, is just sitting in the corner of the room, standing against it, staring in the corner in a very Blair Witch Project way. And Cookie slowly walks up behind him as Gand walks into the door. And Gand doesn't hesitate. He pulls open his little dart launcher he has on his wrist and launches a sleeping dart right into Astimus. And right as Cookie puts his hand on his father's shoulder, and he turns around and just says, like, Cookie, like, what is going on? And then at this point, hilarity ensues as Six Pounder playing Doc says that he slowly arrives at the cellar, mouth agape as he's trying to catch his breath, because his character's not athletic at all. And he stumbles down the stairs and works his way up behind Gand as they're already pulling Cookie's father like onto Cookie's shoulders and working him out of the cellar. And it's at this point that Doc just kind of has a sit down. It's just like, I'm going to need a minute, as the players try to take his father back to the ship. Now, all of this being said, it is difficult for the players because, as I said in the past Storytime episode, I intended for them to just put him on a medical boat and send him to Kashyyyk, because that's probably the only place that he could be treated properly. Not a lot of people treat Wookiees, and that's mostly just because they're rare in the galaxy. There are Wookiees, but they are fairly rare. So the reason I had all this stuff happen is just to show them that it is a dire situation, leaving him in a place where he can't be attended, and also leaving him in a place where there are innocent people around and that he can hurt and get the players in a lot of trouble. So sending him to Kashyyyk is probably the best idea, and they kind of gather that, and they head to the spaceport district to prepare for that eventuality. And as they head down there, a couple of the players just go straight to the ship, but they eventually kind of get there and put him in the medical bay and kind of scan him. And Doc confirms, like, this isn't something that we can fix. He actually uses a force power check to do a sense, and he senses like something really dark inside of Cookie's father, even though there are lucid moments where his father will awaken and act as if he's himself, and then there's moments where he'll just go into a rage. So they decide, we're going to have to put him on a medical ship and just send him to Kashyyyk. So Doc and Cookie send Astimus on like a floating medical table, and they take him outside of their hangar, and they start going into the spaceport where they're going to go find a medical ship. And as they do that, they open up the docking bay doors to their hangar, and suddenly there is a familiar face. There's Caitlin, which is one of their becoming closer friends on the planet, and she's sitting there talking to another woman. And this is a woman the players recognize. It's actually one of the Saphira hunters. And up until this point, the players had heard that most of the Saphira hunters had already left the planet to either go back home or go elsewhere. And they see Caitlin talking with basically one of her family. You know, in the end, all the Saphira hunters are basically family. So they ask her, like, what are you doing here? And she's like, never mind what I'm doing here. Like, I was going to see my friend off as she finally left. But what are you guys doing? Like, who is this? And they have to explain, like, oh, this is Cookie's father. He's not doing well. He needs help. And Caitlin looks over at the woman and says, hey, Ash, can you by any chance like help him at all? And they have like a short conversation going back and forth, where she says, like, I could, but like I don't know these people necessarily, and I trust that I can get him there safely. I just don't necessarily trust that their intentions for this are necessarily good. And after a conversation between Doc and Cookie and this woman named Ash, or Ashley as they found out, they finally come to a conclusion that this is probably going to be the best thing for him. And they can trust her to a degree, or to a better degree than any random person at the very least, especially after what just recently happened, to get him there safely. And she happens to also be a doctor, so she agrees. They take him to her ship, set him up in a Bacta tank, a secure Bacta tank, and she tells them that she will let them know when she gets to Kashyyyk, so that they know that his father is safe. And I feel like that was the best way to go about that. Giving the players someone that they could relatively trust to have one of the players' fathers be in the custody of and be protected by. Because they could have easily just put it on a medical boat, but they would have never known whether or not he was safe. And that was always going to be a thorn in their side. So just straight up being like, no, this person you can relatively trust, at least enough to get him there, will give you enough of a peace of mind that you're never going to have to really worry about it, and you can rest assured that he will get there safely. Which does two things. It makes sure that that they're not constantly having to check up on it, because there's a lot of really cool story stuff about to happen, and they need to not have a constant reminder that they have a thorn in their side, right? And then the second thing is they also need to be fully invested in being here, and not necessarily having characters that they really trust or players being with his father and missing all of this awesome action that's about to happen. So it served its purpose, having this woman named Ash send him to Kashyyyk. With that being said, the players did all head back to the ship and pass out. And when they woke up, there was a data pad waiting for them with a little bit of information. But they were wondering where the data pad came from. So they asked Gideon to play back the tape. And I say tape, but you know what I mean. Play back the video of any recording that was on the ship, because he's been kind of doing constant surveillance. After near the beginning of the game, they had someone infiltrate their ship and almost killed them. So they've been very wary about that. It's kind of like playing D&D and you camp for the first time and then you get attacked in the middle of the night because you don't have anyone watching. That's something you learn early, and that was kind of the idea here. But they look back at the tape and they see basically nothing, and then a data pad appear and then be set down on the table. And what they could gather was that it was probably Nissa, either stealthing around or doing creepy things that she is apparently doing on Ord Mantell at the moment. And they open up the data pad, and it has a lot of information. And in particular, it was a lot of investigatory notes on the New Republic that Nissa had taken. Because when she was in Hut Space, she started to put pieces together in her head. She started to realize that things she heard about several years ago are connected to events that are currently happening, and she wants to get to the bottom of it. For example, a few years ago, she heard about the death of a young senator in the New Republic, and she also heard about this event where the New Republic was investigating these things called the Amexine Warriors. And the Amexine Warriors were actually apparently the fall guy for whatever terrorist organization bombed the one of the Republic buildings in Coruscant. So it was this weird moment of she put that piece together. She realized that the Amexine Warriors were the fall guys, and whatever terrorist organization was behind that was hiding, and they were trying to remain hidden. So she put that together and then went off and investigated that whole line even more. And she just got deeper and deeper into the plot until she realized that it wasn't necessarily an organization that was behind all this. It was the New Republic itself. That the New Republic had been infiltrated, and there were so many people in the New Republic who were actually corrupt and a part of whatever organization this was, that she had to keep an eye on not only everything going on in her stuff, in all of the underbelly of the galaxy with the Shadow Collective, but also whatever the heck was going on in the New Republic. And this is all really important to Nissa because being the fact that she wanted to rip the heart out from the Shadow Collective and make the shadowy underworld, dissipate and be as small as it possibly could be, she wanted to look for the best opportunities to do that by following current events. She was always kind of been up to date on this stuff. And when she was in Hut Space and started putting this together, that's when everything started happening, because she was investigating this stuff, and then suddenly she's now the fall guy for whatever happened to these dead senators on the dead diplomatic people in Hut Space. When usually they don't go out that way, so either they were lured there and then killed for her to be the fall guy on that, or for Dalton rather to be the fall guy, because nobody really knew that she was impersonating him. And then with that as well, it just kind of proved her point that something is going on in the New Republic and they can't be trusted, or at least most of them can't be trusted. And it's not necessarily this First Order that people have been starting to hear mumblings about in the galaxy and see pictures of, like these stormtroopers and stuff. It's not that. It's actually it's something in the New Republic that is causing this strife, because she does connect it to whatever events were happening several years ago with Princess Leia Organa, or no longer a princess, but was a senator and suddenly dropped out of senatorial duties and went off starting to do her own things. And there were some murmurs that Nissa heard about of her starting some kind of resistance to whatever organization this is that was corrupting the New Republic. Either way, she knew that the Hutts were somehow involved in what was going on, at least on the outskirts of whatever was going on. And she, put two and two together, and that's when she realized she was in danger and came back to Ord Mantell. So this was all the notes that were in the data pad that she left for the players to find, because she wants the players to know as much of this as possible, because it's kind of like a movie, right? In some kind of murder mystery movie, you have like the protagonists who are putting the pieces together, and nobody around them can seem to put any pieces together. And that's kind of what's going on in our story, is the protagonists, our players, have put all this stuff together and have realized, like, they know about the First Order. At least they know on the outskirts about the First Order, whereas the rest of the galaxy doesn't know about the First Order yet. And they also know about whatever's happening in the Great Hunt and all of the murders that happened at the beginning of the Great Hunt and seemingly have stopped since then. And it's all of this stuff that is kind of put together that Nissa knows that the players are on board with whatever she is also investigating. So at this time, it is a tenuous alliance between the two people,
But it is working out in her favor because now she has allies to stand against whatever this is. But at the same time, the players still don't necessarily trust her. And the players are, they're also having to contend with the fact that they have watched The Force Awakens and know the plot of The Force Awakens and know that the First Order comes to power and becomes very dominant in some parts of the galaxy. So they're having to separate that knowledge with the knowledge of their characters, and that can be hard sometimes. But everything in the New Republic and that's going on in the New Republic with the corruption and everything, if you're interested in that plot line, go read Star Wars Bloodline, because that's what that is. It's the story of how Leia forms the Resistance and why she does, and it's really, really good. And I've been borrowing a lot of story aspects from that because it is very relevant to that 5-year time period between when Bloodline starts and when The Force Awakens begins. And we're within 2 years of the first scene in The Force Awakens. So we're getting pretty close to the First Order starting to reveal themselves and become as powerful as they are, and people fearing them as much as they have been. So the players, are also uncovering this mystery of how this all happens in the process. And I'm kind of having to fill in that gap because Bloodline ends with the Resistance being formed, whereas our game has started and the Resistance has been around for a little bit. They're not a large organization, but they are an organization, and the First Order is starting to cause havoc. But a lot of people don't believe the First Order exists. So it's this interesting timeline that we're in, where we're exploring how the First Order actually does come to power, and some of the crazy things that they would do to do that. Because if you watch the Force Awakens again, you'll be like, wow, the First Order is actually very brutal. Like, they murder an entire village of people, and Kylo Ren is a very scary villain. They do a good job of making sure that the First Order feels different than the Empire did. They feel more savage in a lot of ways, and I like that. So I've been trying to incorporate that into our story. But with that said, the players are, they're sitting on the ship with this data pad, they're learning all this information, and they're going to use it to their advantage. But at the moment, they can't because they're interrupted. They're interrupted to someone knocking on the ramp to their ship. And Cookie goes over and opens it up and sees Caitlin. And remember, this is a day later after they had just seen her with this woman, Ashley. And Caitlin says, hey, the ceremony is going to be later today. Don't worry about necessarily showing up at a particular date or a particular time. It will just kind of happen when you guys manage to get around there. But hopefully, sometime in the noon to afternoon, we can get this done. And she basically gives them an outline of what everything's that's going to happen. There's going to be like a speech by Vex. Then the players will come out and they'll introduce them. And then after that, they'll go back into a building because this will all happen outside. They'll go back into a building and do these private interviews with the GNN, the Galactic News Network, which I don't think is a thing that necessarily exists in the Force Awakens timeline, but I figured I would add it in because it's a fun way of conveying narrative in a lot of cases. So I've used that as a tool in the past. But they say thanks, and Caitlin just says, oh, one more thing. After we're done, I would like to take you guys out to dinner. And the players are like, okay, that's very strange, but sure, we can do that. So they gear up and they get ready and they head to the business district from the spaceport district, which takes about 15 minutes of walking to get to where they need to be, which is this courtyard. And Alask at this point has completely disguised himself. He wants to look like one of the guards, so the rest of the players kind of go in behind him, and he goes way far ahead. And what he sees is about a group of 20 people sitting at the entrance to this district where they're supposed to be, and he overhears them talking about like, oh, do you think that they'll give me an autograph? And, of that sort of conversation. And he just smirks and then continues on his way as the rest of the players end up going straight into this crowd of people who get really excited when they see the party, and they start shouting like, there they are, there's the Void Ghosts. And they run up with their little like digital pens and pieces of paper and data pads and stuff, and they get all of these like blessings from the players, and they get these autographs and stuff. And I feel like that's a really fun way of conveying to the players that they are part of something that is getting around in the galaxy. They are being seen by people, and they are gaining notoriety. Whether that's a good or bad thing, they are not necessarily sure, but they are gaining this notoriety of being bounty hunters who are about to enter into the finals of the Great Hunt, which is a pretty big honor for anyone who can get through it. So they make it through those people. Alask has scouted out the square, and there's pretty much just a ton of people, but there's nothing too suspicious. They see a large like stage that has been set up temporarily for this event to happen, with a large hollow screen behind it, and there's droids floating around, little camera droids. And the players eventually get there and tell Vex and Caitlin that they're ready to go, and they start up the ceremony, and Vex walks out and does her speech, but the players learn that Vex is not necessarily a good public speaker. In fact, she hates public speaking, apparently, because she stumbles over her words, and she's very awkward, and she starts it off with like, "Welcome, everybody. I want to thank everyone for coming out here." And as she's like constantly looking down at her notes, and you could tell that before they even started this, she was reluctant to do it, but she knew that she had to. She finishes up her speech by thanking the players, the Void Ghosts, for representing Ward Mentel and everything. And then they bring them out and they parade onto stage, and there is like all these lights and cameras, and pictures are being taken, and the players are like bowing and stuff. And then a montage video plays, and it's a video of a lot of the bounties that they've been on, like secret cameras that they didn't know about, where it's doing, zoom ins of all the cool stuff that the players have done this far, and very, very much televising the entire event. And there's even a cool moment at the very end where the camera is like on the boots of Gand, and it slowly pans up his body, and he's faced the opposite direction as he turns around real quick, and shoots like at the camera. And it's this really fun little moment where the players like are realizing that this is very hammed up, and it's meant to be, because whatever's going on with the Great Hunt and the bad, publicity behind it, with the murders and everything, there's also good publicity, because this is entertainment to some degree in the galaxy, at least at this time being, because there's also like a pod racing Grand Prix going on, and they're having to they keep like seeing that every now and again, like these races, but for the most part, they are a big center of attention in this kind of part of the galaxy. After this is done, the players walk down the stairs at the stage and are followed by Vex and guided by Caitlin, and they go into a building. And at this time, Alask has still remained unseen, and everybody just assumes that he's not there. And Alask walks into a building adjacent to the one that they're going into, and goes up to the second floor and peers out through a window so he can see the other players in the other building, but does not want to engage. He wants to stay at a distance, and remain hidden. So the players go in and they meet a guy named Carl Turk, who is just a basic like newscaster, and he seems like kind of a douche, very into himself, but he just tells them like, yeah, we're gonna have a couple questions, feel comfortable. And he starts asking them like right off the bat, like, oh, who do you guys think you are? Like, is this something that you got into because you wanted to get into, or is this something that you were kind of forced into? Like, tell me about yourselves. And they start revealing, all this little information. They start kind of loosening up around this guy, realizing, oh, he's not so bad. We can get through this interview. So they ask like basic like beauty pageant questions, like what motivates you to be a bounty hunter? And Gand responds with things like, oh, it brings me great honor to do this stuff, and it's part of like my growth process. I'm growing in it. And then they ask again, like, well, what makes you guys better than all the other bounty hunters? And they go on and answering these questions, but it starts getting interesting when they say that where do you see yourselves in 5 years? And Venator just says dead. dead by super weapon, which is obviously a reference to dying to the Starkiller base. But as a joke, that's funny. But in context, because he did say like, yeah, I do say that. In context, it does change the way the interviewer asks, because now he's like, okay, this is awkward. Let's move on to the next question. Where are you guys going to spend your money? What are you guys going to do with your money? And then funnily they say, build a super weapon. But all of this together makes for a very interesting interview, because in one hand, if you're watching the interview at face value, you see what the players were going for. As I flip my notes, you see what they were going for. They're talking about ruffians. They're talking about the trials that strengthened them. And Doc just straight up says, I was abducted, just like straight faced, I've been abducted. Because he has in the story. He was abducted at one point by his own people, which was really funny. It was a really funny story moment. And then, they mentioned that they're in this for the money, and that they're going to die to a secret weapon, and that they will build a super weapon. And when you put all this into context, it's not bad. But when you take it out of context, like a news network would, then it starts painting a very interesting picture of the players, and especially one that could be manipulated. And I did that on purpose. I wrote this stuff down because this stuff may have consequences later on, not necessarily because of what they said, but because of the interview itself had its own motives behind it. And we'll get to that in the future, especially if you're sitting in on our games. This may come up in the future, and I wanted to make sure that was addressed. But they finish their interview. They walk outside to Alask, and Alask is like, that wasn't so bad. You guys made it through it. And he was kind of talking through the comms to them into their ears, and managed to hear the whole thing. So he was a part of it, thus not responding as well. But it ended up working out well for him. So they go and talk to Caitlin real quick. She says, don't dress up. This place I'm taking you to, it's kind of like a hidden place in the planet, but it is really kind of cool and out of the way, and you guys you'll like it. But it's not a formal place, so don't worry about it. So they're like, okay, well, where do we meet you? And she points out a part of the map that looks pretty inconspicuous, but doesn't necessarily have any restaurants nearby. So they're like, okay, whatever. They go back to the ship, and Alask just straight up throws out the suggestion, what if she is setting us up? Because we know that Nissa can take the shape of any person. What if Nissa is trying to get us into a spot, and this wasn't Caitlin, this was Nissa? And they're kind of going back and forth, and none of the other players really buy it. They're like, I think that this is actually Caitlin trying to be genuine and being a friend of ours. But at the same time, there's just that notion that Alask is having, that he just can't trust anybody at the moment. Things don't appear to be what they are, and he can't trust that. And that's good. That's a good gut reaction to have. They do dress up. They get to the industry district where she said to meet, and they see her just outside of a dark alley. She walks out of the dark alleyway. It's getting dark at this point on the planet, and she says, "Oh, like I wasn't expecting you guys here this early." And they're like, "Why are you walking out a dark alleyway?" And she's like, "Don't worry about that. That's where we're going." Eyebrows are raised and everything. And she just straight up says, "Hey, I don't want you guys to be nervous or to be upset with me, but I also have another person joining us for dinner. So don't be, it's a friend of mine. Don't be upset. I think you'll really like her." And they're like, "Okay." And they're actually at this point, the rest of the party is really suspicious until she says, "I'm going to be straight up honest with you guys. I want to have this dinner because the finals and the Great Hunt tend to be fatal most of the time. And I feel like this might be the last chance to hang out and talk with you guys as friends before you go and potentially die." And the players are like, "No, we're not going to." And it's like, well, you might. So I want to be careful, and I just want this time to spend. So after that little quick sombering and sobering moment, they follow her down this alleyway. They take a left, they take a right, and then suddenly there's a stairwell down that leads into the ground, like against a wall. And they kind of reluctantly follow her, obviously keeping an eye out for anything that could potentially happen. And they get to this door, and this door has a slide on it, and the slide opens up, and Caitlin says a word, the slide closes, and the door opens up. And they all kind of walk in with her, and she is greeted by whoever was at the door and says, like, oh, your reservations, you guys are pretty much going to be alone tonight. There's a couple tables taken, but you're pretty much good to go. And she says, oh, thank you. And the players walk in, and they see this really cool restaurant. It's almost like an old school speakeasy mixed with a British pub, and they weren't expecting this. This was obviously a very secret place on the planet for people who know about it to come relax. And they sit down at this table, and they are greeted by a woman who is already there sitting at the table. She has long black locks of hair, and her skin is of a coppery tone, but she looks kind of young, late teens, early 20s. And she stands up and greets Caitlin, and they hug for a minute, and Caitlin says, oh, it's really good to see you, Greer. And I like putting moments in the story like that, because for person, which is Six Pounder, who has started reading it but hasn't finished it as of this time, Bloodline, that name stands out to him. Greer is a character that is introduced in Bloodline and is a person who is very close to Leia and is one of her pilots. And it's a really cool character that's introduced in that book, and it's a character that I'm sure we will see in the next movie, considering the next movie has a lot to do with the Resistance and the First Order going at it. And this character in particular joins the Resistance with Leia. Now, she is just to kind of give you some backstory on Greer, she tells them, the players, this after, a little bit of relaxing and getting some food and drink at the table. She does open up to the players and reveals that she is a pilot for the Resistance, or rather a pilot that, and she's a little closed mouth about it at first. She's a pilot that is just, on a mission near Ricci, which is kind of to the southern area of where they're at in the galaxy. And they're investigating some claims of some ships out there, so they're just kind of looking into it. The players are like, that's really interesting. And they start talking to her some more and find out that she's a pilot, but not just a pilot. She also raced in a thing called the Gauntlet. And she pretty much flew an incredibly fast ship, which was an A-wing, a customized A-wing. And the players never found this out, but Doc, or Six Pounder, being someone who read the book, does know that she was trained or was the apprentice of Han Solo. And that is why she knows Leia. And that's one of the reasons why she was working with Leia in kind of a senatorial area before officially becoming one of her pilots and one of her go-tos for the Resistance when the Resistance started up. And it's always really fun to add in characters from the books and from the movies and stuff like that, because the characters that are in those are really interesting, and now they have this connection. So the night goes on where they're talking to her, they're talking to Caitlin, and finally it comes to the point where they have a drink off, and it turns out that people from Pomarth, which Caitlin is from Pomarth, and Greer is also from Pomarth, are really good at drinking some pretty awful stuff. In fact, people from Pomarth, in my idea of what it is, from what I've seen in the descriptions of the book and everything, it's kind of like pirate culture, where they're really dark haired and they've got eyeliner and stuff, and they love their rum, that kind of thing. They're not pirates themselves. They don't go out pirating things, but they are all of Pomarth is known for having really good pilots. That's where a lot of the best pilots in the galaxy come from. And they are just straight up kind of badass. That's who they are. I don't know if Poe is from Pomarth, but I wouldn't be surprised if Poe is from Pomarth. It makes a lot of sense, because he, again, has got that look about him that people from Pomarth do, the dark hair, the kind of darker skin and everything. So that said, they have this conversation, and eventually it gets to the point where she needs to leave, and she says, thanks Caitlin, but Joff is waiting for me and I must go. We got to get back to our mission, but it was nice seeing you, especially because we grew up with each other and everything." So she heads off, and Caitlin just asks the question, like, what is with you guys and Vex? Because there's been tension there lately between Vex and Alask, and it opens up this conversation where they haven't had this conversation before, but it opens up the conversation of talking about everything they know, where it comes to the planet being in danger, the First Order, what they found on the planet with the secret passages, everything that Nissa has found out with like the corruption of the New Republic and everything. And it's this cool moment where Caitlin, as a character, like I am playing Caitlin, right? I know what she knows is nothing about any of this. And for all of this to suddenly come out and the players to map this all out, and her to first be skeptical about it, but then start kind of giving in and realizing that the players are really genuine with what they're telling her, and suddenly gets up and just says, "I will be right back," and tries to chase after Greer because she knows that Greer is part of the Resistance, and Caitlin knows about the Resistance and a little bit about the First Order. She's not a part of it, but she does know about their goals and what they're after. And she knows that Greer is, again, a pilot in it. So she tries to find her, can't find her, pulls open her data pad and starts like sending her a message. And Alask followed her out into the street and sees this message being sent and kind of gets a look at it after a short piece of dialogue where Caitlin reveals that she's a terrible liar and can't lie about it. But they have this conversation of like, oh no, Greer is a part of the Resistance, and I was trying to let her know that you guys know all this stuff so that they know that when they're going to Ricci to investigate these new for the First Order ships that are apparently there, that they also know that these ships are likely coming to Ord Mantell. And it's this fun moment where like the stuff that the players have learned is told to an important NPC that the players have engaged with. And it's that realization of everything happening that the NPC knows that she needs to send this information off to the Resistance. And the players have had contact with the Resistance and have done stuff for the Resistance before. I don't think they ever thought of sending this information to the Resistance, especially because one of their contacts who was a Resistance person on Ord Mantell was found dead. So it's this interesting moment of the players realizing like, oh, we should have done that earlier, shouldn't we have? And they end on the ship. They all head back to the player ship, including Caitlin, where they map all this stuff out and send this information to the Resistance. And then there's a lovely moment where all the players kind of tuck in for the night, except Alask and Caitlin. They're about to head off. Caitlin's about to leave, and they do that moment, and it was even posted in Discord. Like, Alask was ready for this. He does that moment from New Girl. If you watch that show, it was a really great show. I would suggest it, where between two of the main character and one of the guys, they had like a thing going on, and it's kind of been the same for Caitlin and Alask, where there's been this like weird romantic thing. There's kind of some tension there, but they're not really sure. So she goes to walk away outside the ship, and she says bye. And as she's walking away, he grabs her arm and just pulls her close and has this really romantic moment with her. And that's we ended the game last night with them in the cockpit of the ship, alone, because the ship is pretty crowded with all of the players, having a sweet moment. And it's fun being in Roll20 and having the music going during this, because I totally had the Leia and Han Solo theme playing during that, and it was fun because it gives Rabble playing Alask a moment that his character would have, the moment of being a filthy scoundrel, a scruffy looking, nerf herder and stuff like that, and being able to get the princess in a way. And it's fun because that's totally what his character would have done, and that's what that NPC would have done too. So with that, we left it off, and that is where we're stopping for tonight, because we are now ready for players to interact in our next game and watch our next game and everything, which will be this upcoming Sunday. Again, I'll send out private invites to anyone on Patreon this week, so keep an eye out for that. And I'm really looking forward to having people be a part of the game and actually be able to see this stuff happen live, because the next bit is them getting into the finals of the Great Hunt. So you'll get to see the players interact with a Great Hunt and see kind of what they do with it. But with all that being said, we shall see you guys next time.